know. I'm going to mute everyone right now. Okay, so it's 11:01. I will give it like 10 more seconds. People are trickling in. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll get started. I'd like to be mindful of your time, and people will come in and join as they do. So we'd like to get started and welcome you all to our webinar, Preparing Course Content. My name is Jasmine. I'm a learning technology consultant with Teaching and Learning Services at McGill. I'm here today with a colleague who's going to be co-hosting the webinar with me, Mariette, who's also a part of the education technology team at TLS. So just some housekeeping notes. We want to let you know that this session is being recorded. The recording will be posted on our website. I would also like to note that you are muted upon entry, so we'd ask you to hold off with questions while we present. We will be setting aside some time at the end of the webinar to address some of your questions. And one more point, I would also like to say that the slides for this webinar will be posted when we post the recording. So we'll get started by going over the goals we have for today's webinar. So our goals for today's webinar are to demonstrate how to organize and manage content in mycourses, explore how to curate and create materials, including videos for your course, and to identify strategies for students to practice your content. So I'll give the floor now to my colleague Mariette, who's going to talk about organizing your content strategically and why this is important.
Thank you, Jasmine. So let's get started on organizing your course and how to go about organizing your course materials in mycourses. So course organization, it's really key, especially in a remote teaching context, and it's beneficial, of course, for yourself and for your students. The organization of your course really impacts the student experience. So by providing that structure, students are more comfortable, they're more confident. A well-organized course really encourages student motivation, their engagement, and their performance. And students are also able to really focus on the learning because they also know what they are expected to do. And the planning is also key for you as an instructor. It allows you to determine what kind of content you'd like to use, how you'd like to have it organized, and it kind of saves you time by avoiding to curate or create any unnecessary materials. So there are three main strategies for organizing your course. There is setting expectations, using simple navigation, and being consistent. So the first one, in terms of setting expectations, you kind of define and communicate the learning outcomes to your students. So students are aware of what they're expected to learn in your course. And again, in the remote teaching context, you have to be a bit more explicit in terms of any instructions or any assessments that you may have within your course. So on the TLS website, there is a page for guidelines for remote teaching context for winter 2021. And on this page, there is a link to a document called the Course Outline Guide for Remote Delivery. And so this is like a template you can use if you want to create or revise your course outline. And it's really a course outline template for remote delivery. So it's a really good resource. The second strategy is using simple navigation. So imagine exploring your course from a student perspective. You want to try to kind of keep it simple. You want students to be able to easily navigate the course materials and be able to quickly find important course materials. So this is an example of simple navigation. So you can organize your course chronologically by week. So essentially you're creating a module for each week of the course. So in a weekly module, you might have links to your lecture notes, readings, discussions, or even a mini quiz. So you kind of place those, you organize them in the order in which you want students to progress through them. Another example of using simple navigation is you could also organize by topic. So you could, for instance, group the materials for introduction to cells. You could group them all together. So any content, any activities, or any assessments could be grouped under that theme. Another example of using simple navigation is to also, you can kind of organize your materials by the various learning activities. So you would have a module on the readings, a module on the assignments, a module on the discussions. You can organize it that way as well. The third strategy is in terms of being consistent. So having naming conventions for your the way you organize your files, and also keeping the structure consistent. So if you choose to organize by week, and a lot of instructors do organize their course materials by week. So if you choose to do it like this, you can have, for instance, week 1 followed by the topic, and then week 2 followed by the topic, and so forth. So it's kind of really important to try to keep that consistency and keep the naming convention as well. So within the content tool in My Courses, it's organized by modules, submodules, and topics. So modules are like folders, submodules are subfolders, and topics are your course materials. There's no really recommended way in terms of organizing your course. You have to choose really what's right for you, what's right for your content. It's really up to you in terms of how you wish to organize it. And when it comes to your course materials, there's also something in My Courses called release conditions. So you can, for example, you can have content released on a specific day or time. You can have course materials released to a specific group in the class. For instance, let's say if there are students doing a group project and you want to give them specific resources, you could release it just to that group. And you can also create conditions. So you can create a condition where you give, let's say, for instance, give students access to the first module after they view or they visit the course syllabus. And also when you're thinking about your course materials, it's important to be mindful of the type of content that you put in My Courses. So you want to make sure there are no barriers. You don't want to prevent any access to your online content with, for instance, students with disabilities. So you can use the accessibility checker in Microsoft to do a quick scan of your document and to kind of know if there are any accessibility issues. Oftentimes it's images missing alternative text. That could be an issue. Also providing captioning. Now, the really neat thing about Zoom now is you can have live captioning within Zoom. And also when your Zoom recording gets placed into My Courses, the captioning is also there within My Courses. So that's really great. Using accessible media. If you're going to be using some media, just make sure there is you have media with closed captions. And also, if you have any visuals, if you have any graphs or images, try to make sure you put some alternative text to your images. Don't just say like this is a graph. Try to provide a small description of that graph or that image. And it's important to give students options in terms of participation. You could have them engage in chat, discussion posts, breakout rooms. So kind of just think of different ways in which students can engage with the content. Now there's something new within My Courses. Maybe you've probably already heard, but it's new. It's the Learning Outcomes tool. Now this, you'll probably see it. You'll see it when you're in the content tool within My Courses. So you can add learning outcomes for your course, and you could align them to course materials and assessments. So it could be like you could align them to an assignment, a project assignment, a specific video, and students can track their learning outcomes in class progress. And again, the learning outcomes tool is available in the new content experience on mycourses. And so now I'm just going to pass it over to Jasmine, who's going to talk to you about curating and creating your content.
Thank you so much, Mariette. So now that we've covered ways in which you can organize your content, we're going to discuss how you can go about actually adding content to your modules. So you have two choices. You can either curate your content, which means you can collect other people's work or resources that are already available, and or you can create your content. And we're going to go over, we're going to cover both. So whether you curate or create content, it's important to keep a few design principles in mind when thinking about a remote teaching environment. So the first principle is to be intentional. So being intentional can mean a few things. It's important to define your learning outcomes before you start adding content. Following this, all content that you add should align with those learning outcomes. Furthermore, each content piece should be relevant. So you should be asking yourself as you're adding content, does this really need to be here? How does it add to the student's learning experience? And how does it help them achieve the outcomes that you've chosen? This also means that you should be then very clear with your expectations. If you create a reading list, do you want them to read everything on it? Or are there some pieces that are required while others can be considered additional readings or interesting readings for them to check out if they have the time? Online, it's especially easy to upload interesting, but sometimes irrelevant content alongside the intended content. It might also be helpful to set expectations for their time. I've taken a few online courses where instructors indicated exactly how much time they expected us to spend on certain sections. It was very helpful for my own time management. And so then I knew what was the most important pieces to focus on. Being intentional also gives you the opportunity to highlight what's important. So explicitly letting them know that certain sections are more critical than others. And additionally, being intentional with content can also include giving rich examples to support your content. So students might have an easier time understanding concepts whenever they're supported by examples. The second principle is to make your content personal. So build rapport with them by including content that addresses them specifically. Don't be afraid to talk to them in a recorded video or a recorded lecture and just be your normal self that you would be in a face-to-face context. So because you're no longer in a room together, it's difficult sometimes for students to feel connected with you, to feel connected to the content or the institution in the same way that they might face-to-face. So even just little things, simple things by starting a video or a lecture recording, by just saying, hi, everybody, I hope you're all hanging in there, can really go a long way. Doing anything you can to foster that type of rapport should be given priority, given that the circumstances we are in are so extraordinary. And third, keep your content focused. So whether it's readings or videos or lecture recordings, it's important to break your ideas down into smaller chunks so that you present one coherent idea at a time. If you choose to pre-record your lectures, keeping your recordings limited to 5 to 10 minutes is the most ideal when keeping your students' attention focused. It's also a good idea to break down your content with interactive activities, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. So this might include short knowledge checks or potential opportunities for discussion. So as an instructor, you can validate the resources and decide how students interact with the content, much in the same way that you review and select a textbook or readings or activities for students on campus. You can also review and curate online resources for students to interact with in a remote environment. So we encourage instructors to curate content whenever they can. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's a wealth of really great online resources that you can review and curate for your students. So the first place we would recommend you to go or recommend you to look would be within our own library. So the library at McGill has a liaison librarian for each department who are subject specific research experts that can help you usually find what you're looking for. We highly encourage you to use these resources. The McGill community also has access to a variety of platforms and catalogs like Canopy and WorldCat Discover, which have videos, books, and media that are available for you to use in your courses. So again, we encourage you to contact your liaison librarian for more information on this. The next place you can look are at Open Educational Resources, or OERs. So OERs are freely available teaching and learning materials that are either available in the public domain or available under an open license, which allows you to essentially use, reuse, adapt, and share the materials. Again, your liaison librarian can help you find openly licensed teaching materials like OERs. Some well-known OER providers that you may already be aware of include Khan Academy, which are educational videos, and for example, OpenStax textbooks. There are others as well. In addition, there are many other free open resources that you might consider using. So places like YouTube and TED Talks, for example, contain a wealth of educational videos that, that you can use in your courses and share with your students. So because curating involves sharing someone else's work, we believe it's important to mention copyright and intellectual property. So the McGill Library does have certain copyright guidelines. Many instructors don't realize that at McGill, we have a system in place called Savia that allows you to legitimately and fairly post scanned materials in mycourses. So this system allows instructors to freely copy up to 35% of a book to share in mycourses. If you'd like more information on copyright at McGill, you can visit the link we've provided here. It really has a ton of information on this topic. In addition, if you have any more specific questions to your particular context, you can always contact the copyright librarian at copyright@mcgill.ca. We would also like to mention that your intellectual property rights do not change because you're teaching remotely. So I've had a few instructors this semester, and while preparing for this semester, voiced concern about their lectures being recorded or their slide decks being shared in public spaces. Please note that this is not allowed, and your content is protected in a closed environment like mycourses. You might also, because of this, consider including a statement about copyright of your course materials and posting it either as an announcement in your course or on your course syllabus. We actually have templates for these statements on our website, which we're going to share with you. I have the link right here. Okay. If you're unable to curate the information you want to share with your students, you can always go about creating it. So forms of content that you may already be familiar with creating include PowerPoint presentations and PDF readings. You may also already be familiar with creating activities for your students in mycourses. Since you're teaching in a remote setting, a type of content that tends to be the most popular in this context is lecture recordings and videos. So because of this, I'm going to focus on some best practices and strategies for creating these types of recordings for your course. So in a previous offering of this webinar, I focused on some principles for creating video content. if you've watched the recording by chance, but I've realized that this semester going simple is better, and therefore I would just like to focus on presenting you with some guidelines for pre-recorded lecture recordings. You can get fancy and generate more refined videos. However, your time is very valuable, I realize, and this is something that you may not have the time or even the bandwidth to do. So today we're just going to keep it simple and focus on pre-recorded lecture recordings. So before diving to creating this type of content, we suggest that you take the time to think a little bit about what you want to do before you actually do it. So you likely do this when you're preparing for a face-to-face lecture, but you want to consider that the delivery online is a little bit different. Keep in mind that students are able to pause your video, they can replay it, they can speed it up, slow it down, etc. So it's important to be very intentional with the content that you present in your lecture recordings. You always want to first, as I said before, determine your goals and what you want students to learn or get out of that particular recording. As with most things, with course design in general, you should always be thinking about your learning outcomes. So asking yourself along the way, how does this content I'm about to present relate to those outcomes? Have a plan in place with what you're going to cover. So recording a lecture is different than teaching in a class where you might potentially repeat certain concepts or get sidetracked on a thought because of a certain question or comment that comes up. So just remembering that students can re-listen to your recordings is important. And to say what you need to say, keep it short and keep it to the point. You don't need to write a script word for word, though it might be helpful, but you should always have an idea about what you're going to say. If you watch online recorded lectures or educational videos on YouTube, for example, it always seems that people improvise what they're going to say, but most of the time they actually have a very well-established script before they record. You might also consider making sure you have all of the things you need before you proceed. So do you need a microphone, or do you have a built-in microphone on your device? Do you want your talking head, do you want your person to be recorded also with your recording? What presentation program are you going to be using? So for example, PowerPoint is usually the most common. And then getting feedback. So feedback is always a good idea to get before or after you record, just to make sure that your lecture has a nice flow and you meet your goals, but also to make sure that your audio is clear, your pace is appropriate, and your visuals make sense too with what you're saying. And it might also be an opportunity to get a family member to maybe just sit down and actually listen to what you teach. So then whenever you're happy with your recording and the final product, you can then share it with your students on mycourses, which I'm going to talk about in a few slides. So in terms of tools that you can use to create these videos or lecture recordings, there are some options. So it really depends on what your needs and what your plans are. If you're going to be doing a basic recording of your lecture with or without students present, you can do so using Zoom. So Zoom allows you to record live and interactive sessions with your students. You can also record your lectures ahead of time. So just by planning a session and not inviting anybody to it and clicking record, you can very easily record a pre-recorded lecture this way. Zoom is likely the most straightforward and streamlined way to go about recording a lecture. If you log into the platform through mycourses and record from there, when you're done, the recording is automatically saved and uploaded to the lecture recording system in your course so that students can access it. So the pros are that it's straightforward. You can use features like the screen capture or whiteboard or annotations to interact with your material or potentially highlight important things. The cons are that it's somewhat limited to recording just what's going on in that moment. You don't really have the opportunity for any sophisticated editing or adding any additional media once your lecture is recorded. If you're looking to record short videos that just involve you presenting PowerPoint slides, you can actually do this within PowerPoint. It's quite simple. You record a voiceover of your presentation in presentation mode, and then export it as a video file, like an MP4. I've been told by multiple instructors that it's very user-friendly. If all you want to do is record your PowerPoint presentations, just keep in mind that it's limited. You can't record yourself, only your voice, and you're restricted to the features within PowerPoint itself. And finally, you might be interested in producing more complex video productions that could include different types of media, different images, multiple videos, annotations, etc. Camtasia is the most sophisticated of the three softwares I have here. It's a very powerful video editing program, and it's available to the McGill community. We will be sharing the link of the IT software site where you can get access to Camtasia and other available tools. So with Camtasia, you can potentially generate entire video modules or tutorials, but we recommend this only if you're comfortable with using the software and if you have the time to do so, because it can be very time consuming. So the arrow I have here at the bottom indicates the amount of time it takes and the level of complexity involved in creating videos with each of these tools. So keep in mind that Camtasia videos, like I said, are very time consuming or can be very time consuming, and just be aware of the time that you have to dedicate to other parts of your course, like your assessments, for example. If you do have the extra time, perhaps Camtasia is right for you, but just know that the expectation is not for you to have these perfectly edited video productions. Also keep in mind that you don't have to choose one type of video or lecture recording tool over another. You can choose a variety and use a variety of video types in your course. So you could have just the basic lecture recordings. And if you did want to play around with Camtasia for something very simple, you could, for example, record an introductory video and have that in your course as well. So you can kind of mix and match the types of videos or recordings that you do share with your students. So regardless of what you use to produce those videos, the best way to share them with your students is through lecture recording system in mycourses. So that is found under the lecture recordings tab. As I said, if you record through Zoom within your course in mycourses, your recordings are automatically uploaded to the lecture recording system. I'm going to show you exactly how that process works in a moment. Captions are also automatically added to your video as well, which is really nice for accessibility. If you record elsewhere like PowerPoint or Camtasia and you produce a video file, you can manually upload it to the lecture recording system, and the same thing with the captions occurs. So it gets captioned and processed, and students can access it in the same tab. There's also an integration with the lecture recordings and content. So your content tab right here, which allows you to host the videos in the content section of mycourses so that students don't have to move back and forth between content and lecture recordings tab, and that you can have essentially all of your videos and all of your other content and activities under content in mycourses. So that's quite nice. So this is the process by which Zoom lectures are recorded and sent to the lecture recording system. So first, you must schedule a Zoom session through the Zoom tab in mycourses. You must then make sure that your Zoom session is recorded and the session is recorded to the cloud. So once your session is over, there's an automated process that happens that when your meeting ends, the recording that you automatically recorded or manually recorded is uploaded to your Zoom account at mcgill.zoom.us. The recording then, after some time, is removed from Zoom and processed and sent to the lecture recording system. So that it will end up actually in your Zoom trash can, but it will then appear in the lecture recording system. And in the lecture recording system, it's compressed and then captioned and processed. And after a certain amount of time, sometimes this can take up to 24 hours, depending on how many lecture recordings are being processed at the same time. It is then available under the lecture recording tab in My Courses, and students can access it through there, or you can also insert it into your content tab in My Courses as well. So we'll move on to just briefly discussing creating opportunities for practicing your content. So there are different strategies in which you can get your students to interact and engage more deeply with your content. I have an example here of an online course at McGill that uses the strategy of adding quick and low stakes learning activities to the flow of content. So as you can see in this module, in particular, they use videos, which are about 5 to 10 minute videos, staggered with self-assessment questions. So it's not the expectation that your course must look like this. Don't feel, as I said before, the need to go into like a full production mode and produce entire modules with videos, but it just gives you an idea of how you can break up your content pieces with activities to reinforce them. So just to reiterate and expand on that, rather than presenting long content pieces, articles, videos, PowerPoint files, whatnot, and then giving your students knowledge checks only at the end of a module, you might want to consider staggering them or alternating pieces of content with an activity. So when I say content, I'm talking about your readings, PDFs, maybe articles on the web, PowerPoint slides, and videos or lecture recordings. And when I say activities, I'm talking about self-assessments, which are very similar to quizzes in My Courses, but they are no stakes. It's just opportunities for students to practice the content on their own and do their own sort of knowledge check. Activities also can include very low stakes quizzes, like a 1 or 2 question quiz, and discussion prompts, which you can all embed within your table of contents in the content section of My Courses. So just to reiterate, short activities like this give students an opportunity to check in with their learning. It also shifts the focus, their focus from just listening and being passive with their learning to being a little more active. So you can choose these types of activities as knowledge checks after pieces of content are presented, or you can actually use it as a way to get them thinking about content that's coming up. So I'll pass the next section, the conclusion, back to my colleague Mariette before wrapping up and turning it over to you for questions.
Thanks, Jasmine. So we're already kind of at the end of the session here. So in conclusion, we looked at how you could organize and structure your course, how you can use existing materials, how you can go about creating any additional content or course materials, and thinking about some activities that you'd like to include in your course. If you want to know more about the tools available in My Courses, there is a My Courses Essential course that you should have access to. So when you log into My Courses, it should be one of the courses listed there, My Courses Essentials. And in there, you'll find basically an overview of a lot of the tools that are used in My Courses. If you need more information or if you need a refresher, that course is available to you. This is a webinar, and that's part of a series of webinars. So we'll be offering webinars in December and also in January. We'll be having some webinars for you. There's also the recordings that are available on our website as well. If those dates and times do not work for you, you could always access the recordings. Now, I know, Adam, thank you so much for moderating the chat. I know there were quite a few questions that came in the chat. If there are any other questions, and if there's anything else you'd like to know, please type it in the chat.
Where can I ask questions, if any, about my course or recording? You could go for it right now if you want. is it okay for students to be recorded? So you mean for them to have their video on while you're recording? So this, it's okay. I mean, it's not required. Like, it shouldn't be required. Students should have the option to turn their video on or off. You can highly recommend that they turn it on, but for privacy reasons, it's not within a policy to say that they have to turn it on. And they are, yes, they're asked to consent when their lecture recording begins. So if they're not feeling comfortable being recorded, they can always watch the recording after the live session. If we have discussions or oral presentations, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I feel like it's the same idea. You can't you can't force them to be recorded for an oral presentation or a discussion. But Adam, maybe you can jump in here. I'm going to turn off the mute everybody.
For the, I think the Carolyn posted the 2020 guidelines for instructors, and I think all the details are in there about what you're able to do or not to do. Essentially, the recording that's happening in your course, when you enable it, everyone consents to be part of that recording, and hence anything in that recording is allowed to be shared within the course. Keep in mind that it's not to be posted for the world. It's not to be put on YouTube. The idea of that consent is that it's part of the McGill course. So if for example, there are oral presentations that can be part of the course that can be recorded, it depends on how you're going to do it. If they're oral presentations just to you as an instructor, in which case they can record them on their own, or if they're presentations to the class itself, in which case they can also be recorded as part of the course as well. So again, that depends on how you've structured it. And Carolyn, thank you, has posted a really good details here as well.
Mm-hmm. Were there any questions that happened during the presentation that were unanswered? Can I make available my pre-recorded lectures only for a limited time? Technically, yes, you can. So are you asking if you can remove them after the course is finished, or do you mean within time frame in the course? You can technically do both, but I'm thinking there has to be kind of a legitimate reason to do it during the course while the course is running and live, or classes are still in session. Oh, did somebody say something? No. Anything else? Yes, Anne-Marie, are you not able to unmute yourself?
Oh, yes, I didn't know we were allowed to speak.
Yes, you can.
Thank you for the session. My unanswered question was how you use mycourses for the pre-recording of the lecture, because you mentioned you should set it up as a Zoom session and just not invite students. So if it's within mycourses, how do the students not see that? Like, how do you block? I taught this fall, so I know how to do the recording.
Right.
In a class, but I don't know how to do it ahead in mycourses.
So, I mean, I'm trying to think, like, okay, if you want it to be transferred to the lecture recording system automatically.
Because there's such big files. I taught in the morning and it wouldn't appear till 6 p.m. on my teaching day. So right. I can't do it without using mycourses.
So here I could jump right in. What you can do is you can record it on your own. You don't have to schedule it through mycourses, but what you'll have to do is pull it in manually. So you can book it on your own in your own time with mycourses. And then what happens is that in your list of all of your courses or all of your recordings, you can access the previous recordings and hit the button and it'll pull into your course. There's an instructions on how to do that on our website. It's one of the different ways that you can access or pull in recordings. There's a couple of different ways. One is automatic if you do it through mycourses. Another one is if you're scheduling it with Zoom on your own, you can pull it in afterwards. You can also upload a video on your own if you recorded it with something else. So there's about 4 different ways. I'll post that link in the chat for you.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question here. What do you suggest to record the course in advance or to organize the class? And I'm assuming you mean like record it live. You can do a mix of both. Sometimes what I've seen this semester is instructors have pre-recorded parts of their lecture, and then they use the actual live session to do more interactive activities and have breakout rooms and discussions on that pre-recorded lecture content in there. So it really has to always go back to your learning outcomes and what you want to do, what your course is about, how it's going to be structured. But this is one way that I've seen instructors use the pre-recorded lectures. It does then open up just more time for you to have that interactive opportunity with your students. How long should you plan to have the lectures pre-recorded so that it's available? Is that your question? I'm going to assume that yes. Oh, it should be within a few hours. So yes, it's been up to 24 hours like we've seen at the beginning of the fall, but the system has gotten a lot faster now. So it should only take a few hours for the lecture recordings to be posted. That's if you're doing it, recording it in mycourses and having it automatically uploaded. If you're going to do it manually, I mean, that should only take less than an hour for the uploading process. I mean, yes, to be safe, if you don't want to, if you want to avoid any panic, for sure, 24 hours would be good enough. I thought I turned the unmute option off. There we go. Are there any more questions? We're just about to hit 11:45, 2 more minutes. So if anybody has any lingering, I've allowed you to unmute yourself. So sorry about that. I thought that was checked. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and being so engaged and interactive. Yes, if you have more questions, you can always email tls@mcgill.ca. You can also, we can provide the link if you want to request a consultation to discuss something further, you can do so and meet with one of the learning technology consultants. We'd be happy to do that for you. Yeah, so we don't have that link handy, but if you email tls@mcgill.ca, they'll point you in the right direction. All right. So that'll be it for today then. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your Monday. Maybe I'll see some of you in the afternoon session on interaction and engagement.